Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining CNBC. So many developments in the last several days. I want to get your thoughts on the most recent right here in the Gulf Arab countries. And of course, that is the Iranian-Saudi rapprochement brokered by the Chinese. King Salman says that he's been invited to go to Iran. President Raisi has been invited and has accepted an invitation to the kingdom. Is that a good deal for Israel?
I think it has very little to do with Israel. I think it has probably a lot more to do with the desire to de-escalate or even eliminate the long-standing conflict in Yemen. I think that Saudi Arabia, the leadership there, has no illusions about who are their adversaries and who are their friends in the Middle East. And I think they understand that Israel is the indispensable partner for the Arab world in achieving security, prosperity, and peace.
And in terms of being an indispensable partner, can you just walk me through what Israel would be willing to give in order to have Saudi Arabia join the Abraham Accords?
First of all, we'd like very much to have peace with Saudi Arabia because I think it would be another huge quantum leap for peace. And in many ways, it would end the Arab-Israeli conflict. I'm not saying it would end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Palestinians are about 2% of the Arab world. But it would end, in many ways, the conflict between Israel and the Arab states because Saudi Arabia is so important. Now, the Abraham Accords that we had were monumentally important, and it showed a great deal of leadership on the part of the Gulf state leaders, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and we also had, of course, Morocco and Sudan. We would like to expand the circle of peace to its totality. We've already had steps of normalization with Saudi Arabia. As you know, we've been flying over the airspace of Saudi Arabia since 2000, 2 years actually before the Abraham Accords. We recently got the ability to fly over Saudi airspace and Omani airspace, so we cut the time to India and Asia by hours. And all of these things are obviously happening with full Saudi, not merely Saudi acquiescence, but with their full cooperation. I think the possibilities are endless. I think that what is being shown in the Gulf states, throughout the Arabian Peninsula, is tremendous imagination, tremendous entrepreneurship. And if you combine that with Israeli innovation, which is also tremendous, I think the sky's the limit, and even the sky is not the limit because there are many opportunities in space as well.
Prime Minister, I spend a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, and I've been told many times by senior leadership, it's not a question of if ties will normalize with Israel, it is a question of when. But the problem that I'm told again and again is that you, sir, and your politics for the Saudis today are toxic. And I'm talking about violence against Palestinians and even members of your own cabinet essentially suggesting that the Palestinian people don't exist. 14 million people might have a problem with that statement. What are you willing to do in order to make a peace and an Abraham Accord palatable to Riyadh?
I think it's palatable. I think they understand that there are enemies of peace. There are organizations, terrorist organizations, usually fomented by Iran, but forces like Hezbollah and Hamas, they don't want to see Israel here. By the way, they don't want to see many of the Arab governments here. So they foment terrorism, they foment religious and...
Then why are they meeting with them in Riyadh, in your mind? Because essentially what we've seen is Saudi Arabia meeting with the Syrians, meeting with the Iranians, Hamas, as well as the Palestinian Authority. So what are the motivations in your mind for Riyadh meeting with your enemies?
Maybe to tell them that they're going to have to prepare themselves, maybe to try to tell them to stop the kind of terrorism that they foment. Again, I don't think the Saudi leadership has any illusions about the nature of its friends and the natures of its adversaries, and also the nature of those who foment violence deliberately. And I'll tell you something. When I said, and people say, you say, no, peace with Saudi Arabia is impossible. When I said years ago, I may have said it on your program, but I certainly, when you last interviewed me 9 years ago, but I certainly said it many years before we had the Abraham Accords. I said, look, if we wait for the Palestinians, we're never going to get peace because unfortunately the Palestinians are commandeered by a leadership that wants to see Israel disappear. They don't want a peace with Israel. They want to see a peace without Israel. So I said the way to get peace ultimately is to go to the Arab states first, make peace with the Arab world, and circle back in, and then make peace with the Palestinians who realize that Israel is here to stay. And people, were skeptical. They poo-pooed it. And of course, I continued to work under the surface with meetings with many leaders in the region, often below the surface, always below the surface, and then we surfaced with the Abraham Accords. I'm telling you now that I think that there is a keen interest in having the remaining Arab states seize the future with Israel. The future belongs to those who innovate. Israel is one of the two great innovation nations in the world today. And this affects agriculture, it affects water, it affects energy, it affects medicine, communications, transportation, everything. Everything is being technologized. And the visionary leaders of the Arabian Peninsula understand that. So I think there's a keen interest there. And I think also there's something else. If you look at where the problems are emanating from, 95% of the problems in the Middle East emanate from Iran. Terrorism, aggression, many subversion, they originated one way or the other from Iran. And those who partner with Iran partner with misery. Look at Lebanon, look at Yemen, look at Syria, look at Iraq. I mean, these are countries that are almost on the failed states status. And yet those who partner with Israel boost their societies and boost our common relations to great heights. We have billions of dollars now in investment, in trade with the Gulf states from nothing just a few years ago. And it's climbing on. We haven't even scratched the surface. So I think there are obstacles, but I think the opportunities are much greater.
You mentioned that a few years ago that you were working, as you said, beneath the surface to get these deals done, to get the Abraham Accords. There is a rumor that a couple of years ago you even visited right here in the UAE. But since that time, they have been loath to issue an invitation to you. I mean, it must feel like being Moses, being able to see the promised land, but just not being able to get here. When are you going to come to the UAE?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the places I've been to in the Middle East, but I will say that I spoke a few days ago with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, whom I respect as a great friend and a great leader, a visionary leader, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to visit soon.
Tell me this, sir. When you have these conversations with Gulf Arab leaders, obviously the Palestinians do come up. What do you say to them when they say, you've got to stop the violence, you've got to stop kicking out people at prayer time from the al-Aqsa mosque?
Well, first of all, there's an axiom there are two axioms in your question that are not true. The first is that I'll talk about the most important one, that we kicked out people who were praying in the al-Aqsa mosque. In fact, people were trapped in the al-Aqsa mosque by radicals who prevented them from entering and leaving. And our responsibility is to allow free access to everyone. And first of all, to Muslims, to their holy sites. And I think you only see the end of the reel when we take action against those radicals who are firing fireworks at us, rocks, iron bars, and so on, to prevent people, Muslims, from exercising their free right to enter and leave the mosque. So, I think if you ask me, and that's the second thing, when we talk about things, I don't go into our conversations. I'd say they're good conversations, they're warm conversations, and they're also realistic conversations. The Arab leaders generally know the facts, and they know that Israel is a force for peace and ultimately will achieve peace. First, in my opinion, with the Arab world, and secondly, with the Palestinians. And I don't give up on it any more than I gave up on having four peace agreements, historic peace agreements, with 4 Arab states, which we achieved in 4 months. Now, mind you, there was a lot of work before that, but I believed it possible, and everything that I'm telling you now, I think is possible as well, and I'm working for it.
Nonetheless, sir, you do have a perception problem. If I look at the numbers, and I think we can agree that when it comes to the markets, things like numbers don't actually lie. According to Startup Nation Central, 80% of Israeli company executives have said that investors have been canceling meetings since the start of the year as a result of the protests. Israeli high-tech companies raised 70% less in Q1 of 2023 than they did in Q1 of last year. In your mind, how are you going to put a stop to this slide?
That's actually less than what has happened in Britain and in the United States. You know, that the high-tech...
But it's still a problem.
Oh, it is, but it's still a problem everywhere for the high-tech industry. But I think it's a momentary problem. In fact, I think that Israel has made enormous gains. I had the honor and privilege of leading Israel's free market revolution. So we moved from a country with roughly $17,000 per capita income under my stewardship as finance minister and prime minister we jumped 20 places in the world GDP and enormous gains in world in GDP per capita, which is about, according to the IMF, about $56,000 per capita. Again, until recently, until we took the gas out of the sea, no natural resources, only the ingenuity of our people and the enterprise of our people. Our GDP per capita now exceeds that of Britain, France, Japan, and most other advanced countries. Look, here's what I think. I think the future, as I said, belongs to those who innovate. I think the momentary fluff, the momentary dust that is in the air is just that, dust. The fundamentals of the Israeli economy are very powerful. Our debt to GDP ratio is going below 60%. It used to be 100% when I began the market reforms. Our deficit is nothing. It's about 1%. Our growth is expected to be significant. But here's what I found in the past when people said to me the same thing, and I said to them the same thing. I said, wait till the dust settles. And what happens right now is this. The smart money moves in because they know that the fundamentals are great. They know that Israel has tremendous R&D, tremendous economic resources, tremendous ingenuity, tremendous innovation. I want to say stupid money. The less smart money moves with the herd, moves with this or that report. The smart money comes in and they'll make a lot of money. So those who come in now and are coming in now are going to make a lot of money. Those who come in a little later are going to make a little less money. And I'm saying that, and look, you have this now recorded, so you can test it very soon. Just wait.
I will be testing with that. But I have a quick question for you, sir, about China specifically. Obviously, China has been very busy, as you know, in the Gulf Arab countries over the last several years. They're the largest foreign direct investor in Saudi Arabia, as well as right here in the UAE. They've now brokered this peace agreement, this rapprochement between Iran and Saudi. They've also offered, via their foreign minister, apparently, to broker peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Do you think that that's something that the Chinese should be a part of?
Well, I'm not aware of any specific offer of this kind. Look, we respect China. We deal with China a great deal. But we also know that we have an indispensable alliance with our great friend, the United States. Through changing administrations, changing governments in Israel, there's a very firm bond between Israel and the United States. If we can have others contributing to regional prosperity and peace, we welcome it. But I think that not only Israel, but I think in many ways most of the countries in the Middle East would welcome an American, not merely the American involvement in the Middle East, which has been ongoing, but a greater engagement of America in the Middle East. That's quite separate.
That was my next question, honestly, because what I've been seeing over 13, 15 years covering, I'm dating myself, but covering this part of the world, is the retrenchment, frankly, of the United States. And we've seen China really in the last few years coming to the fore. Is that a good thing when the Gulf Arab countries, so many countries in the region, are more in touch with Beijing, seemingly, than they are with Washington?
I'm not sure that's an exact description of the problem, but of the situation. But I think it's very important for the United States to be very clear about its commitment and its engagement in the Middle East. I think that contributes enormously to stability and to security and ultimately to peace. But I can tell you this, and I say this with no bragging and no exaggeration. In the Middle East itself, I'm not talking about outside powers, Israel is a supreme force for stability, for security, for prosperity, and for peace. The peace accords that we've had up to now are a sign of that. We have 6 now, because we also had peace accords with Egypt and Jordan before the Abraham Accords. But I think if we move to the next step, I think that you will see a Middle East that you cannot even recognize now. You are talking to me from Dubai, where, you know, things were unimaginable. If you looked at Dubai 50 years ago, or even 5 years ago, it's changing rapidly. The potential is enormous. If you looked at Saudi Arabia 50 years ago or 5 years ago and compare it to now, it's changed enormously. If you looked at Israel 50 years ago or 5 years ago, it's unrecognizable. What I'm arguing is this, that we have done enormously well alone, but we can do a lot better together. And I believe in this. And again, when we do it, it becomes self-evident. And I think that what I'm saying about expanding the peace to include Saudi Arabia, which is a tremendously important Arab state, I think things will become self-evident as well. We'll bolster prosperity, security, and peace.
Sir, when we talk about expanding that peace, would that peace potentially expand to your neighbors in Lebanon? You managed to sign a gas deal with them, define those maritime borders, and that's a country, frankly, that could use some help when it comes to innovation, when it comes to economics. They're essentially a failed state.
Yes, I think they are, but I think they're a failed state that has been commandeered by Hezbollah, by a radical Islamic terrorist group, Islamist terrorist group that is essentially a proxy for Iran. And, you know, Iran, it doesn't care for Lebanon. It doesn't even care for its own people whom it subjugates. Iran has taken the money.
But in order to get that gas deal, you had to basically do a deal with the Americans and Hezbollah. So they're a reality.
Yes, that deal was done, and I think I have a lot of criticism about it. But one of the things that people promised was that it would add to stability or to the moderation of Hezbollah. It hasn't. I think as long as Hezbollah is there, and Hezbollah keeps talking about eliminating Israel, there's very little you can do. And I think that's unfortunate for the people of Lebanon. I think the reason the state is collapsing is because the Hezbollah is not accountable to anyone. It rules with the force of the gun. It doesn't care about the Lebanese people. It allows the collapse of the Lebanese economy to continue. They get paid in dollars. They take care of themselves. They don't take care of the people of Lebanon. That's a tragedy. You know, when I was a young soldier in the army 100 years ago, we used to say that, we don't know who the first country to make peace will be, and it turned out to be Egypt, because of the courage and foresight of Egypt's President Anwar Sadat and Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who was also vilified at the time, by the way, as an enemy of peace. But we also said, we don't know who the first country that will make peace with Israel will be, but we know who the second one will be. It will be Lebanon, because Lebanon had such a great hope of being sort of the Switzerland of the Middle East, and that, unfortunately, has not happened. It was first commandeered by the PLO and then commandeered by Hezbollah to the detriment of the people of Lebanon. If the day comes when Lebanon is governed by people who do not want to see Israel destroyed, then what you will see there is the same kind of miracle that you see in the Gulf states. Just exactly the same thing. And Israel will be part of it.
Final question, sir. I've spoken to you in the past about Iran's nuclear program. Now the Saudis are working on their own civilian nuclear program. And of course, that nuclear program, unlike the one here in the UAE, will not subscribe to the 123 agreement. And that's because they want the ability to process their own uranium. Taking a step back, you said earlier, we would never have imagined 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that we'd be where we are today. The imaginable and perhaps the unthinkable could become reality, and that is a very nuclear Middle East. Are you worried about the growth of nuclear programs, particularly in Saudi Arabia, and the destabilization of this part of the world?
Well, I'm worried about the nuclearization of Iran, and I've devoted a good part of my adult life to trying to roll it back, or certainly slow it down, and I think in many ways we have, but we haven't stopped it. I think what is happening is this, and I've said that the nuclearization of Iran, Iran's acquisition of nuclear weapons, would immediately foster the nuclearization of the Middle East. Other countries would seek to develop their own nuclear weapons. So the nuclearization of Iran...
And that's what we're seeing, essentially, you think?
Well, I'm saying that if this process continues to its conclusion, then yes, you'll see a Middle East crisscross with nuclear tripwires, and that's a terrible thing for peace. And that was essentially the bulk of my criticism of the very dangerous nuclear deal with Iran, because it didn't really stop Iran from developing next generation centrifuges to speedily enrich uranium. It did nothing about the missiles to carry atomic bombs. It didn't do anything about the weaponization of the atomic weapon. Nothing. They did nothing with that. They just gave all that money to Iran by lifting sanctions. And what did Iran do with the sanctions? They didn't take care of the Iranian people, solving their water crisis, solving their agricultural crisis. They just fed it into terrorist organizations and subversion throughout the Middle East. So I was, and also got immunity from potential attacks. So I thought that was a very unwise thing. But I also said in my speech before the joint session of the U.S. Congress, I said, as Iran approaches nuclear weapons, you'll see the proliferation of nuclear weapons throughout the Middle East. And I think there's still time to prevent that, and I'll do everything in my power to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
We've seen the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Bushes as well, all with different attempts to put an end to Iran's nuclear program. In your mind, how is it possible to end their program when so many subsequent U.S. administrations have failed to do so?
I think there are two essential conditions. One is to have crippling economic sanctions, but they too are not sufficient alone. You have to have a credible military threat and the willingness to take credible military action if the threat fails, if deterrence fails. Nothing has changed. That is always true of rogue regimes who are trying to develop nuclear weapons. Saddam Hussein's nuclear program was stopped by credible military action on our part, as was Syria's attempt to develop nuclear weapons, stopped by credible military action on our part. Gaddafi stopped his nuclear weapons program by credible military threat from the Americans. North Korea did not face any credible military threat, so it developed a nuclear arsenal that has half of Asia now shaking with fear, and perhaps it could reach now to the western coast of the United States. Iran has been slowed down by successive acts, by crippling sanctions from the international community, and by other actions that we took, but the jury's still out. I mean, ultimately, if you ask, the answer is it only works if deterrence is based and anchored in a credible military threat. I'm not going to walk around that. That is it. It's as simple as that.
Prime Minister, it's great to have you on CNBC. Thank you.
Thank you.